The snow had been falling since Tuesday. I was sitting in the waiting area of St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, watching it pile up on the ledge outside the window. Everything outside was going white. Everything inside me felt the same way. Blank, cold, like something had been erased. My daughter lay in the ICU on the 4th floor, 29 years old, hit by a drunk driver on the Gardiner Expressway on a Wednesday morning on her way to work. She was a kindergarten teacher. She had a cat named Biscuit and a boyfriend named Derek who hadn't left the hospital in 4 days. The drunk driver had a suspended license and a prior DUI conviction. He walked out of his police interview and went home. My daughter didn't walk anywhere for a very long time. The bills started arriving before she was even out of surgery. I'm not a dramatic person. I've lived 63 years and I've handled things quietly, one at a time. But when I opened that first envelope in the hospital cafeteria with a cold cup of Tim Hortons in my hand, my vision went strange at the edges. Even in Ontario, even with OHIP covering the surgeries, the costs stacked up faster than I could track. The spinal rehabilitation facility her team recommended wasn't covered under provincial insurance. It was a private center in Mississauga, the only one in the region with the specialized program her neurologist said gave her the best chance of walking again. $48,000 for the full program. Then the adapted equipment for her apartment. Then the long-term physiotherapy. The numbers kept growing, and I kept sitting there in that cafeteria, watching them grow. I was 63. I was retired from 30 years as a school librarian with a pension that covered my apartment in Scarborough, and not much else. I'd already dipped into my RRSP. I'd already called my brother in Nova Scotia and he'd sent what he could, which was $3,000, and it cost him something to send it. I knew that. It wasn't enough. Nothing I had was enough. That's when the man in the gray coat appeared. He sat down across from me without being invited, mid-40s, very polished, the kind of person whose shoes cost more than my monthly groceries. He set a business card on the table between us. "I'm Oliver," he said. "I represent a gentleman named Edmund Whitfield. I believe you know the name." I did. Edmund Whitfield was the founder of Whitfield Capital Group, one of the larger private equity firms based out of Bay Street. You didn't need to follow business news closely to have heard of him. His name was on a wing of Mount Sinai Hospital. "He's been following your daughter's situation," Oliver said. "He'd like to help." I looked at him the way you look at someone when you're not sure if you're being pranked. I was 63 years old and exhausted, and my hands still smelled like hospital hand sanitizer. "Help," I said. "How?" "He'll cover all costs associated with your daughter's recovery. The rehabilitation center, the equipment, everything. In exchange, he asks one thing in return." He slid a sealed envelope across the table. "He'd like you to marry him." I laughed, not a polite laugh. The kind that comes out when something is so absurd your body doesn't know what else to do with it. "I'm 63 years old," I said. "I'm a retired librarian." "Mr. Whitfield is 67, Oliver said. "He has a terminal diagnosis, pulmonary fibrosis. His doctors have given him approximately 8 months. He has spent his life in boardrooms, and he would like to spend whatever time he has left with someone who will treat him like a person rather than an asset. He's not asking for anything beyond companionship. When he passes, you would be free to continue your life, and your daughter would have everything she needs." I sat there for a long moment. The snow kept falling outside. Somewhere upstairs, my daughter was breathing through a tube. I told Oliver I needed to think about it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair beside my daughter's bed, and I held her hand, and I told her things I probably should have told her more often when she was well. That she was the thing I was most proud of in my life. That the year she was born was the year I understood what it meant to love something more than yourself. She couldn't hear me. Maybe she could. I still don't know. By morning, I had made my decision. Not because I stopped being afraid, but because the fear of losing her was bigger than every other fear I had. The wedding took place on a Thursday afternoon in the offices of a Bay Street law firm. There were no flowers. There was a justice of the peace, Oliver, and Edmund's housekeeper, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Kowalski, who handed me a tissue before the ceremony began, even though I hadn't started crying yet. She had the look of someone who understood things before they happened. Edmund was seated in a wheelchair. That surprised me. I had known about the illness, but I hadn't pictured the wheelchair yet, hadn't pictured how much the disease had already taken from him. He was tall, or he had been. You could see it in the frame of him, the long arms and broad shoulders that had probably once filled a room. Now he sat folded into himself, his face the color of old paper, his breathing careful and deliberate, the way breathing becomes when it costs you something. He looked at me when I came in, not through me the way sick people sometimes look at you, somewhere past your shoulder at something you can't see. He looked directly at me and he said, "Thank you for coming." Like I'd done him a favor by showing up. Like this was a dinner party and I'd driven through traffic to get there. I see Lake as a joke. She hit her help and nearly died in a rock and nearly drowned. We drove north of the city in a black SUV, past Bari and up into the gray November countryside, to a property on the edge of Georgian Bay that took my breath away even in November, even with the trees stripped bare and the water the color of slate. The house was enormous. It was also, I would discover, almost entirely silent. "Your room is the one at the end of the hall on the second floor," Edmund said when we arrived. "Mrs. Kowalski will show you. I'm usually in my office during the day. I work until about 4, then I rest." He paused, his breath catching slightly. "If you need anything, ask her." He said it gently, not coldly. But he wheeled himself away before I could respond, and I stood in the entryway of this enormous, beautiful, silent house and felt for the first time the full weight of what I had agreed to. Mrs. Weary. Kowalski appeared at my elbow with the uncanny timing I would come to associate with her. "Come," she said. "I'll make pierogies." The kitchen was warm. It smelled like butter and dill and something simmering on the stove. She moved around it like she owned it, which in some ways I think she did. "How long have you worked for him?" I asked. 19 years, she said, since before his wife died. I didn't know he'd been married. 8 years. Lovely woman. Cancer. She set a bowl in front of me. He built this house for her. She never got to live in it. He moved in after she died, and I think he's been punishing himself with the quiet ever since. She poured tea and sat across from me and looked at me with those sharp eyes. "He's a good man," she said. "Not an easy one, but a good one." I believed her. I don't know exactly why, but I did. The first few weeks were strange, the way only genuinely strange situations can be. We moved around each other in that big house, like two people who had agreed to share a train compartment for a very long journey and hadn't yet figured out the etiquette. We ate dinner together at 6, which was Edmund's routine, and which I adopted because it seemed rude not to. We talked about small things. The news. The weather coming off the bay. Whether the ice would come early this year. He asked about my daughter every evening, not in a performative way, not to be polite. He asked specifically, how had the session gone? What had the physio said? Had she been able to bend her knee past the threshold they were targeting? He remembered what I told him the night before and asked about it the next night. I noticed that. I visited her 3 times a week, driving down to Mississauga in the rental car Edmund had arranged for me without my asking. She was making progress. Slow, painful progress that cost her something every single day, and that she met with a stubbornness that made me want to cry with pride every time I watched it. Derek was always there. He'd taken a remote position at his company so he could be at her appointments. He was going to be a good husband. I could see it in the way he watched her. She asked me about Edmund. "He's quiet," I said. "Is he kind?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. "I think so." "Good," she said, and she squeezed my hand. Something shifted in the 5th week. Not dramatically. Not the way things shift in stories, with some decisive moment you can point to afterward. It shifted the way light shifts in November, gradually, until one day you notice the quality of it has changed. Edmund had a bad night. I heard it through the wall. The coughing that went on too long. The silence after that was somehow worse. In the morning, I came downstairs earlier than usual and found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of him. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like he was 40 years older than his age, and very tired of being brave about it. I sat down across from him and poured myself tea and didn't say anything for a while. Then I said I couldn't sleep either. He looked at me. His eyes were dark brown and very clear, one of those faces where the eyes are the last thing the illness gets to. "I keep thinking about what I haven't done," he said. "Not the grand things. The small ones." I keep thinking I should have gone to more hockey games. My nephew played for his university team and I missed most of it because I was in meetings. I kept thinking I should have retired sooner, I said. My daughter asked me to go to Portugal with her 3 years ago and I said I'd go next year. He was quiet for a moment. Next year, he said. That's the most expensive thing in the world and nobody tells you. After that, we talked more. He told me about his career, the early years when he was building the firm out of a 2-room office on King Street with one junior analyst and a coffee maker that sparked every time he turned it on. He told me about his wife. Carefully, the way you talk about someone you've loved and lost when you're still protective of the memory of them. He told me he'd had 30 years of professional success and had spent most of it alone in the technical sense. The way you can be alone even when you're surrounded by people who need things from you. I told him about 30 years in a school library. The kids who came back as adults to tell me about the book that changed them. My daughter at 7 sitting cross-legged on my living room floor reading a Farley Mowat book I'd brought home, so absorbed she forgot to eat dinner. My own retirement, which had felt like a door closing more than a door opening, and the strange grief of losing the daily purpose of it. He listened. Not the way people listen when they're waiting for their turn. The way people listen when they're actually interested. But something was bothering me. It had been bothering me for weeks, and I'd been filing it away because I didn't want to be the kind of person who looks for problems. Edmund was sick. I could see that. But the arc of it felt wrong to me in a way I couldn't articulate. His pulmonary fibrosis diagnosis explained the breathing difficulties, the fatigue. What it didn't explain was the unpredictability of it. The days when he seemed genuinely better, more color in his face, more energy in his voice, followed suddenly by days where he could barely finish a sentence without needing to stop. Pulmonary fibrosis, as I understood it from the reading I'd been quietly doing, was a progressive disease. It declined in one direction. It didn't fluctuate like weather. I started paying attention. Oliver visited twice a week. He brought what he called Edmund's supplements, a collection of capsules and powders that he would set on the kitchen counter with a little laminated card listing the dosages and timing. Edmund took them without question. He'd done so for months, Oliver told me when I asked. Since the diagnosis, his own doctor had recommended this protocol. I asked Edmund one evening which doctor had put together the supplement program. He thought about it. Oliver manages that, he said. He has from the beginning. Oliver manages which doctor you see. Oliver coordinates everything, yes. It was easier. I didn't want to spend my remaining time on the phone with insurance providers. That made sense on the surface. Edmund was a man who had always had people managing the details of his life. Of course he would have delegated this. And yet, I waited until Oliver had come and gone one afternoon and Edmund was resting. I took the supplement bag to my room and photographed each label. Then I drove to the Shoppers Drug Mart 40 minutes down the highway and asked to speak with the pharmacist. Her name was Judith, which I realize is a name I should avoid. Scratch that. Her name was the pharmacist on duty, a careful, methodical woman who looked at each label and grew more still with each one she examined. This one, she said, tapping the bottle of the main supplement. This isn't a supplement, it's a pharmaceutical compound. And this dosage, taken with this one. She indicated a second bottle, these two together in a person with a compromised respiratory system. She looked up at me. It would accelerate the symptoms, she said, significantly. It would look on all the standard tests like a natural progression of the underlying disease. My mouth went dry. Could it be fatal? Over time? Yes, it could. I sat in my car in that parking lot for a long time. The snow had started again. The fine, dry kind that squeaks under your boots and stings your face. I thought about Oliver, who had been Edmund's assistant for 12 years, who managed Edmund's calendar and his doctors and his supplements and his daily schedule, who stood to receive, according to the partnership agreement I had found in Edmund's study one afternoon while looking for a pen, 22% of Whitfield Capital's assets in the event of Edmund's death. I drove home in the dark. I found Mrs. Kowalski in the kitchen, and I told her everything. She sat very still while I talked. Her face did not show panic. It showed something older and colder than panic, the expression of someone who has loved a person for a long time and has just been told that love was not enough to protect them. "We call the police," she said. "Right now." We did. They came, 2 OPP officers from the Barrie detachment, then more people after that. people from a financial crimes unit because of the asset angle. Edmund was confused when they came to the house. He'd been resting. He came to the living room in his dressing gown and looked at all these people standing in his home. And then he looked at me, and I told him as calmly as I could what I'd found. He was very quiet. Then he said, "Oliver has been with me since before my wife died." "I know," I said. He looked out at the bay for a moment. Then he said, "Call the ambulance." He spent 11 days at Royal Victoria and Barry. They ran every test available. They found the compounds in his bloodstream, found the interaction damage, found records in Oliver's email that he'd apparently never considered anyone would look for, conversations with a competing firm about the availability of Whitfield Capital's assets, conversations with Edmund's estranged nephew on his mother's side, who was apparently not entirely unaware of the plan and stood to benefit from it. Oliver was arrested at his condo in Yorkville on a Tuesday morning. The charges were serious. The process was long, but Edmund came home. He came home with his real medication, the actual protocol for his actual diagnosis, which was genuine but far more manageable than anyone had led him to believe. His pulmonary fibrosis was real but early stage. With proper treatment and careful management, his doctor told us, there was no reason he couldn't have years. Years. He sat in the kitchen the first morning back and drank his tea, and Mrs. Kowalski made him scrambled eggs and he ate them, which he hadn't been able to do properly in months, and I sat across from him and we didn't say very much. We didn't need to. That evening we sat on the screened porch with blankets and looked at the ice starting to form at the edges of Georgian Bay. "You saved my life," he said. "Mrs. Kowalski saved your life," I said. "I just found the receipts." He smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile without the shadow of exhaustion behind it. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I know what this was when it started. I know what I offered you and why you accepted it. And I am not asking you to pretend it was something else." I waited. "But if it's possible," he said slowly, like a man choosing each word with the care of someone who has learned not to waste them. "If it's possible that it became something else, I'd like to know that." I thought about the mornings in the kitchen talking about next year. I thought about the way he asked about my daughter every evening, specifically remembering every detail. I thought about sitting on this same porch in November, watching the water and feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like I was somewhere I was supposed to be. "I think it became something else," I said. "Somewhere around the pierogies." He laughed, an actual laugh, surprised out of him, and it changed his whole face. The legal proceedings ran for the better part of 2 years. Oliver was convicted on multiple counts. The estranged nephew received a separate set of charges. Edmund restructured the firm and spent considerable energy ensuring that nothing like this could happen in that organizational structure again. My daughter walked at her own wedding that spring. Not without assistance. She had a cane, and Derek was at her elbow every step. But she walked. She wore a dress the color of cream, and she cried the whole way down the aisle, and so did I. And so quietly, in the back row where he thought I couldn't see him, did Edmund. Mrs. Kowalski did not cry. She had apparently used up all her tears at our wedding and had nothing left. My daughter pulled me aside before the reception. "I like him," she said. "He likes you," I said. "He talks about you constantly." She looked at me for a moment, the way she's looked at me since she was very small. That particular look that means she's seeing something she doesn't quite have words for yet. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Like you stopped waiting for something bad to happen." Edmund sold a portion of his firm's holdings and we established a fund through the Law Society, the Whitfield Patient Advocacy Fund, providing legal support and interim financial assistance to families navigating serious injury claims against insured drivers in Ontario. It was the gap I had fallen into. It was the gap that had made me vulnerable to being offered an impossible choice in a hospital cafeteria. If we could hold that gap open a little less wide for the next family, it was worth every administrative meeting I have ever sat through, and I have sat through many. We still live in the house on Georgian Bay for most of the year. We come to the city for my daughter's appointments, for the fund's quarterly meetings, for the hockey games I now attend with Edmund's nephew, the one who actually played, not the other one. We don't speak about the other one. Edmund is well. Not perfectly well, not the way you are before illness enters the story, but well in the way that matters. The way where you wake up in the morning and have things you want to do and people you want to do them with. He takes his actual medication with his actual doctor's supervision, and he calls his nephew more than he used to, and he has taken up bird watching, which I tease him about mercilessly and which he pursues with the same focused intensity he apparently brought to building a Bay Street firm from a 2-room office. The snow still falls heavy here in January. I watch it sometimes from the kitchen window, the big lake going white beyond the glass, and I think about that hospital cafeteria, about the envelope sliding across the table, about how I sat in that chair beside my daughter and asked myself what I was willing to do. I think about how desperation makes you say yes to things you would never have imagined saying yes to, and how sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, the thing you said yes to in desperation turns out to be the truest thing that ever happened to you. A woman contacted the fund last month. Her husband had been badly injured by an impaired driver in Sudbury. She had no idea where to start, who to call, how to hold everything together while also sitting at a hospital bedside every night. Our fund coordinator connected her with a lawyer and bridge funding within 4 days. She sent an email. She said she didn't know people like us existed. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about a man in an expensive coat, sitting down across from me in a cafeteria when I had nothing left, and offering me something that looked, on the surface, completely insane. I thought about how paying attention to small things, the wrong bottles, the wrong dates, the way something just doesn't quite add up, can be the difference between a story that ends in loss and one that ends in something you couldn't have planned for if you tried. I told Edmund about her email over dinner. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Should we call her?" I said yes. We did. We still check in with her sometimes. That's the thing about choosing to pay attention. It doesn't stop. It just keeps finding new places to be useful. Outside right now, the ice is solid all the way to the point, and there is a bufflehead duck that Edmund has apparently named Gerald, sitting on the open water at the edge of the channel, and Edmund is in the porch with his binoculars in a state of great excitement, and Mrs. Theed of great excitement. Kowalski has made soup, and my daughter is calling at 7, and none of this, not one detail of it, was anything I could have imagined, sitting in that hospital in January with a cold cup of coffee and an envelope I was afraid to open. But here we are, and it's real, and we chose it, and the duck is still there. I've been thinking lately about what it actually means to pay attention. Not the polite surface kind, nodding while someone talks, scanning a label without reading it. The real kind. The kind that costs you something because it means you have to slow down when every instinct is telling you to just get through the day. I didn't save Edmund because I was clever. I want to be honest about that. I saved him because I was uncomfortable. Something sat wrong with me for weeks before I did anything about it. The pattern of his bad days didn't match what I knew about his diagnosis. The bottles didn't match what I'd read. Oliver's helpfulness was a little too complete, a little too eager to keep Edmund away from his own doctors. I felt it before I understood it, the way you feel a draft before you find the open window. What I've come to believe, not because anyone told me to, but because I've lived long enough to watch it play out, is that the people who cause harm the way Oliver did rarely do it all at once. It happens in small steps. A responsibility quietly absorbed here, a doctor's appointment quietly canceled there. Each individual step looks like efficiency, like loyalty, like care. It's only when you step back and look at the shape of it that you see what it actually is. I think that's why it works as often as it does. We're not looking for the shape, we're looking at each piece individually and finding a reasonable explanation for it. My daughter used to say I was the most suspicious person she knew, and she meant it as a gentle criticism, the way children criticize the habits of their parents that turn out later to have been useful. I don't think of it as suspicion. I think of it as a kind of respect for the people you love and for the reality they're actually living in, not the one someone is constructing around them. Edmund trusted Oliver because Oliver had been there for 19 years. That trust was earned over time, and then it was used against him. That's one of the harder things to sit with, I think. The fact that the same quality, loyalty, the willingness to let someone in, that makes a person good is often the exact quality that makes them vulnerable. Edmund wasn't foolish. He was faithful. And faithfulness without discernment is something that can be exploited by someone who has no intention of being faithful back. What I keep returning to is this. The things that saved Edmund weren't dramatic. They weren't brave in any movie sense of the word. I drove to a Shoppers Drug Mart. I asked a pharmacist a question. I sat in a cold car for 20 minutes and thought it through. That's all it was. The intelligence that matters in real life isn't brilliance. It's the willingness to ask the question even when asking it feels disloyal or alarmist or like too much trouble. Mrs. Pharmacist, Kowalski said, "We call the police right now," and she said it without hesitation because she had loved Edmund for 19 years. And love, the real kind, doesn't protect itself from inconvenience. That's what I want to leave with anyone who watched this and recognize something in it. The people worth keeping in your life are the ones who will drive to the pharmacy at 9 o'clock at night with a bag of your supplements and ask the uncomfortable question. And, if you are that person for someone, if you feel that draft and can't quite find the window, keep looking. Don't talk yourself out of it. Don't decide it's probably nothing because nothing is easier. Pay attention. Ask the question. That's how we take care of each other. It always has been.